Firstly, I'd like to do the acknowledgement of country. This event is being held on the traditional lands of the Bururung of the Kulin Nation people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. Thank you for coming to the Jewish Holocaust Centre on this cold winter night, and I warmly welcome our survivors, our volunteers and wider JHC family, frequent attendees of our events and any first-time visitors to the centre. I'm Dr. Anna Hirsch, I'm the Senior Archivist here, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Chiaro Renzo, who flew in from Italy yesterday to undertake research and to present her lecture titled "Where Shall I Go? Jewish Displaced Persons in Italy, 1943 to 1951. Dr. Renzo has qualifications in Hebrew language, literature and culture. She was awarded the Placidia Cohen Memory Award for her MA thesis on her research of displaced persons camps in southern Italy. Her PhD in history was through the joint doctoral program of the Universities of Florence and Siena, and her thesis examined the policies of Jewish and other rescue agencies assisting Jewish DPs, as well as activism of the Jewish DPs in order to make Aliyah. And can I just remind you to please switch off your phones? Thank you. Dr. Renzo was a visiting research fellow at the Hebrew University in Israel, at Yad Vashem and the Wiener Library in London, and she is currently a postdoctoral fellow in Jewish history, Department of Asian and North African Studies at the Ca' Foscari University of Venice in Italy. Where should I go is such a weighty question. For many Holocaust survivors, there was little personal choice. Returning home was often out of the question due to local danger and wider politics. The State of Israel was yet to be established, and Aliyah Bet was a risky journey, and most other desired destination countries still held tight refugee quotas. Some prominent Jewish Australians, including Mina Fink, one of the JHC's founders, and her husband Leo, were heavily involved in charitable organisations and worked with their international counterparts assisting survivors to gain visas to Australia. DP camps may be considered as intermediary spiritual zones as well as transitional geographic zones, places of renaissance or rebirth where survivors started new lives. They went to school, were trained in professions, and many met their spouses and began their families. So it's really wonderful to bring Dr. Renzo's important research to a Melbourne audience, as I expect many of you, and maybe we'll have a show of hands, who have a connection with these Italian DP camps, either as survivors as well as descendants. Can I get a show of hands? Fabulous. Okay, and which leads me to conclude. There will be an opportunity at the end of the lecture for questions, and please give Dr. Chiaro Renzo a very warm welcome.
Good evening, buonasera. First of all, thank you all for coming, and thank you to the Jewish Holocaust Center for giving me the chance to present my research, and thank you for this warm welcome. I'm here today to present my research on the Jewish DPs in Italy between 1943 and 1951. I'm aware that most of you are familiar with this topic, but I hope that you will learn something new today or will show something new. So let's begin. During the last 2 decades, international historiography has increased its interest in the history of the Jewish DPs. However, literature has addressed in particular the history of the Jewish DPs in Germany, while Italy has been almost exclusively depicted as the way station to Palestine and as the strategic headquarters of the Mossad Le'Aliyah Bet, the underground organization of the Jewish agency which arranged the illegal immigration of the Jewish survivors from Europe to British Palestine after the Holocaust. Several questions regarding the Jewish DP presence in Italy remain open. Who are the Jewish DPs? Where and how they live in the refugee camps? Who took care of them? How they relate to Zionism, and what Zionism represents for them in the particular context of the post-war years and the DP camps? and so on. Drawing on a wide variety of sources, which I collected in Europe or in Israel and the US, I tried to fill this gap. I situated Italy as a key military, political and humanitarian site for the Jewish DPs, placing my investigation in a broader chronological framework, which goes from the liberation of southern Italy in 1943 to the end of the International Refugee Organization mission in 1951. I'd like to start with an overview of the situation of Italy in 1943 and an overview about the actors involved in these circumstances, the Jewish DPs themselves and also the rescue network. Historiography has usually taken 1945 as the starting point for the narration of the history of the Jewish DPs in Europe. However, if we look at the specific case of Italy, a core of Jewish DPs was already in the country when the Allied army first set foot in southern Italy in 1943, while the Holocaust was still going on. In July 1943, with Operation Husky, or what is commonly known as the invasion of Sicily, the Allies began their campaign for the liberation of the so-called... Yes, of course. The Allies began their campaign for the liberation of the so-called European theater, crossing the Mediterranean Sea from North Africa. The gradual liberation of continental Italy brought unexpected radical changes from the military, political, and social point of view. In July 1943, the Fascist Grand Council, the supreme body of the Fascist Party, held a motion of no confidence in Mussolini, who was soon arrested. After the collapse of the Fascist regime, the monarchy signed an armistice in September 1943, and Italy declared its unconditional surrender, and by virtue of its status of co-belligerent country, it was not allowed to become one of the Allies. Instead, until 1947, Italy was an occupied country, and its liberated regions came under the Allied military government on occupied territories. Within 3 months, Calabria, Puglia, Basilicata, and part of Campania had been occupied by the Allies, while at the same time the terrible shadow of Nazi rule fell over northern Italy. Italy's internal political situation became even more complicated when the monarchy found refuge in Puglia and established the Kingdom of Southern Italy, while Mussolini, supported by the Germans, escaped from prison and founded his puppet Italian Social Republic. The event, which took place between summer and autumn 1943, marked a watershed in Italian national history. On the one hand, grassroots movement began to fiercely oppose Mussolini's dictatorship, gaining the upper hand while the Allies advanced northward. On the other hand, the Jews still under Nazi and fascist rule, for the Jews still under Nazi-fascist rule, it marked the beginning of the assault on Jewish lives, which led to the deportation of 6,806 Jews, of whom more than 2,000 were non-Italian Jews. When we talk about Italy, we can distinguish at least 3 macro groups of Jewish DPs. The old refugees, who were those Jews who arrived in Italy as exiled from the Nazi-controlled territories before Italy joined the war in 1940, who had been deported from Italian-occupied territories between 1940 and 1943. The new refugees, who arrived after the end of the war from 1945, and from the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, another wave of Jews surprisingly reached Italy. They were known from archival sources as Tripolitanians, a term which refers to North African Jews who, following the pogroms in those areas, stopped in Italian refugee camps on their way to Eretz Israel. Since I'm still developing this, my investigation on Tripolitanian Jewish DPs, and for reasons of time, I will mainly focus on old and new refugees today. The rescue network. Let's have a look to who is helping the Jewish DPs in Italy. Beside the Allied Army, many international actors had been gradually involved in the rescue and rehabilitation of the Jewish DPs in Italy. The first ones who met the Jewish DPs had been the Jewish soldiers from British Palestine who voluntarily joined the Allied Army in 1942. They were part of single units attached to the British Army who reached Italy in summer 1943 from North Africa. By October 1943, there were approximately 1,000 Palestinian Jewish soldiers, and this would grow to 10,000 in the following year with the foundation of the Jewish Brigade. Second, the United Nations were finally involved. First, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, UNRWA, founded by the Allies in 1943 in order to implement specialized programs for the socio-economic reconstruction of the countries affected by the war, including the care and repatriation of the DPs. In mid-1947, UNRWA was replaced by the International Refugee Organization, IRO, a specialized refugee agency in charge to repatriate or resettle the last million of DPs still living in refugee camps in Germany, Austria, and Italy. Under the supervision of the UN agency, also the Jewish organization received the authorization to help the Jewish DPs in Italy. As you can imagine, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee stood out as the humanitarian organization which made the difference for the Jewish refugees in Italy. Last but not least, moved by both humanitarian and political consideration, the Jewish agency was also present among the Jewish DPs in Italy with a precise Zionist project. I would like to go back and spend some words on the old refugees, since they are part of a forgotten chapter of the history of the Jewish DPs in Italy. I think this is important for several reasons. First, it will shed light on the ambiguous attitude of the fascist regime toward the Jews, and will also help to understand why the new refugees at their arrival in Italy soon after the end of the war already found a well-prepared rescue network ready to help them. As you know, in 1930s, international community basically was not able to save the refugees from the Nazi-controlled territories. The League of Nations failed, many states closed their door to emigrants, and the Jewish settlement in Palestine was unable to welcome exiles due to the restriction on Aliyah implemented by the British mandate from 1939. Hence, on their desperate effort to escape the Nazi-controlled territories, Jews choose their destination essentially relying on practical consideration, the chance to accessing the target country, the prospect of transferring personal assets, and the possibility of working or studying. In this hopeless international scenario, Italy met all these practical needs, thus becoming a precarious haven for thousands of foreign Jews. Despite this aspect, the attitude of the fascist government is not to be regarded as an open policy in response to the Jews' dramatic situation in countries under Nazi rule. Historiography has shed light on the fact that Mussolini avoided explicit anti-Jewish views or aims in his political program until 1938 for strategic reasons, and that in many cases the large degree of autonomy of local prefects at the borders and their inclination to cronyism and corruption facilitated Jewish migration to Italy. In 1938, the situation started to change when Mussolini announced the imposition of the racial law in September. This pro-Nazi shift redefined Italian citizenship along racial lines and political loyalties, thus preparing the ground for the exclusion of Italian Jews from Italian society and the subsequent expulsion of the foreign Jews from Italy. From that moment, the fascist government ambivalence turned into growing hostility and discrimination, and finally into an open hostility when Italy joined the war in 1940. However, between 1938 and 1940, around 10,000 to 11,000 non-Italian Jews succeeded in leaving Italy while civil maritime traffic was still available. When Italy entered the war in 1940, non-Italian Jews were classified as enemy aliens and were consequently considered as a threat to national security. Of the 3,800 non-Italian Jews residing in Italy, by October 1940, 2,500 had already been interned in camps and in towns. Not unexpectedly, this number tripled in spring 1943, when the Red Cross reported that there were 6,386 foreign Jews interned in Italy. They were located all over the country, in urban as well as remote areas. More than 70% of them were living in confino libero, which was a sort of house arrest, in more than 150 towns, while the remnants were concentrated in camps. Mostly, around 20% of them were in Ferramonti di Tarzia, DP camp, which is in Calabria, the largest concentration camp designed and built ad hoc by the fascist government in order to intern non-Italian civilians. There were the Jews in Ferramonti di Tarzia were mainly Germans, Austrian, and Czechs, and Yugoslav, who were in Italy or in Italian-occupied territories between 1940 and 1943. At Allies landing during summer 1943, the geographical distribution of a significant numbers of non-Italian Jews in southern Italy proved crucial in determining the fate of the Jews in the whole country. While Mussolini had started to persecute and deport Jews in his puppet Italian Social Republic as ruthlessly as anywhere else in Nazi-occupied Europe, in the area under Allied administration, the Jews finally gained safety and freedom, as defeated Italy immediately repealed the entirety of the racial legislation. This is a photo from Ferramonti di Tarzia DP camp. I will show you on the map after where is Ferramonti. At the end of a military operation, and the Nazi surrender marked the beginning of a new wave of Jewish refugees towards Italy. They were the so-called new refugees who managed to enter Italy through the Alps, first in self-organized group and afterwards in group guided by the Jewish Brigade. This movement, known as Bricha, flight in Hebrew, was carried out by illegal means and involved Jewish DP who wished to avoid repatriation, longing to reach British Palestine or to be resettled outside Europe, as well as all those Jews who, in the attempt to return home after liberation, were compelled to move again because of anti-Semitism. Numbers. In my research, I didn't deal so much with numbers and statistics of arrivals and departures, since I'm most interested in the attitude of the Jewish DPs and the social condition of the Jewish DPs in the refugee camps, but of course, numbers are important, so let's talk about numbers. In January 1944, the Allies revealed that more than 60% of the refugees in Italy were non-Italian Jews, and that no Jewish, I'm quoting, no Jewish problem as understood in other European countries exists in Italy. These somewhat comforting words were meant to inform Allied headquarters that there was no evidence of death camps and mass murders and atrocities in Italy, in Italian region under Allied control. Allies ended approximately 3,000 Jewish DPs liberated from confino libero, as well as from fascist concentration camps. However, they supposed that the number of the Jewish DPs in Italy was even higher, around 5,000 to 6,000. Many Jews were still in remote districts where they hide themselves before the armistice, and fearing to disclose their identity, were only gradually revealing themselves on seeing Jewish soldiers in the Allied forces. From the demographic point of view, the old refugees profile underwent a radical change between 1940, when most of the Jewish refugees were German, Austrian, and Czechs, and the liberation of Italy, of southern Italy, in 1943, when almost 80% of them were Yugoslavs. These figures was the result of the Axis occupation of Yugoslavia in 1941 and of anti-Semitism anti-Semitic policy adopted by Germany, Italy, and Ustasha in those areas. Another change happened with the end of the war, so with the arrival of the new refugees, when more than 50% of the Jewish DPs in Italy were of Polish origins. When we talk about refugees, it's difficult to give precise estimation, but we can say that between 1945 and 1948, the JDC estimated a population of 15 to 16 Jews per year residing in refugee camps and Aksharot in Italy. But there were even more since many of them live in towns or were not registered as refugees. This number are very reduced if we compare it with the German case. However, between 1945 and 1948, the Jewish DPs in Italy were the biggest group of foreign refugees, while in Germany they were only a minority among the national groups and ethnic group residing in the refugee camps. With the Allies advancing northward, the military authorities set up dozens of refugee camps and assembly centers all over the country. These camps were run by the Allies themselves, mainly those for prisoners of war, by the Italian government, who was charged with the responsibility to take care of his own civilians, and by UNRWA, whose task was to take care and repatriate as soon as possible people coming from Allied countries. So the camps hosting Jewish DPs were mostly run by UNRWA, and which was held by the JDC. The Allies set up countries, as you can see here, in many buildings, from schools to barracks, film studios, or private villas or homes. And they were located mostly in three areas: in Puglia, the hill of Italy, Rome and its surrounding, and the area between Milan and Turin. And there were also other DP camps, as the ones in the region called Marche. To show you the great variety of assembly centers in terms of location, architectures, and organization, I will show you some pictures of the DP camps. After the liberation of Ferramonti di Tarzia concentration camp and its transformation into a DP camp, the Hill of Italy suddenly became a core transit site for thousands of Jewish survivors after the war. In 1944, they were mainly distributed in the province of Bari and Lecce, where the Allies had prepared refugee camps in completely different spots. In Bari, the Allies reopened the former prisoners of war camp of Bari Carbonara, which was renamed DP Transit Camp Number 1, where many Jews were accommodated along with other civilians of other nationalities. From Allied military sources, it appeared that already in early 1944, 4 other DP camps in Lecce province were meant to become significant recovery point for the Jewish DPs. These DP camps had been set up by the Allies in Santa Maria al Bagno on the Ionic coast, in Santa Maria di Leuca, where the Ionic Sea meets the Adriatic Sea, and in Santa Cesarea Terme and Tricase Porto, both on the Adriatic side. There, the Allies identify clusters of houses and villas, as the one you can see here, used as summer holiday residence by local wealthy owners in order to accommodate the refugees. At the end of the war, more than 60% of the Jewish DPs in Italy were distributed in these 4 DP camps in Lecce province, which became camps only for Jewish refugees. To show you some picture, this is Cinecittà DP camp, a transit and mixed camp organized by the Allies in the Italian film studios, where living conditions were very difficult because of overcrowding and bad sanitation. This one is Grugliasco DP camp, established by the Allies following the requisition of a female psychiatric hospital close to Turin. This one instead is Cremona DP camp near Milan, which was open in an old barrack, which was an old monastery. And this one is the children's home in Selvino, established and run by the Jewish soldiers in a building on the foothills of the Alps, which before 1945 served as a boarding school for elite fascist youth. And this last one is a TBC center in Merano at the border with Austria, which was closed in 1953. As you know, not all the Jewish DPs in Italy live in refugee camps. Many of them live in Aksharot, translated in English as collective farms. Aksharot were typical installation of the Jewish settlement in British Palestine, where new immigrants receive a Zionist education and were trained to live as pioneers, chalutzim in Hebrew, in Eretz Israel. But how this form of collective living had been transplanted among the Jewish DPs in Italy? As testified by the Jewish soldier Zvi Ankuri, the first Akshara was taught as a specific solution for the Jews in Ferramonti, which later became an institutionalized solution to train the Jewish DPs for Aliyah in all the refugee camps in Europe. The Jewish soldiers collected children and youth from Ferramonti in order to establish the first Akshara, which was called Rishonim, the first ones, located near Bari. This happened in January 1944, while the war was still going on. After this experiment, the Aksharot soon became an attractive and alternative solution to the refugee camps, supported by the JDC. It's quite complicated to establish the exact number of Aksharot set up in Italy, since they were often established or closed according to the arrivals and departures of the Jewish DPs. In addition, it's even more complicated to give a precise estimation of the population residing in Aksharot in post-war Italy, mainly because of the high mobility of the refugees inside the country and outside its borders. Just to give you an idea, we can say that in February 1947, the number of the Jewish DPs organized in collective farms reached its peak. So 7,500 DPs were housed in more than 70 Aksharot located all over the country. It means that around 35% of the Jewish DPs in Italy live in Aksharot, which is a great average compared to those of the US zone of Germany, where between 2 and 3% of the Jewish DPs live in Aksharot. The main sponsor of these collective farms was the JDC, which obtained recognition for the Aksharot from the UN agency that agreed to consider them a self-governing organization and to grant international assistance to their residents who were treated as out-of-camp DPs. The JDC officers chose the Aksharot as the policy for Italy, stressing that the Akshara community type of living, I'm quoting, offer an excellent opportunity to help these people become reoriented to normal community living and to help rehabilitate them to undertake constructive and productive efforts. The Akshara program, initiated by the Jewish soldiers, became politicized after the end of the war, when the number of Jewish DPs increased and the Jewish agency sent its delegates as representative of Zionist youth movements and religious movements. From that moment, each Akshara became affiliated to precise movement, as you can see, from Shomer HaTzair to Agudat Israel, from Gordonia to Mitzrahi, from Anoar HaTzioni to the Betar. Which were the factors and the forces which influenced the Jewish DPs' experience in the refugee camps? Stuck in this site of transit between the traumatic past and the desire to start a new life, the Jewish DPs became the protagonists of a story of rebirth, drawn and influenced by different forces and factors. First, the new emerging humanitarian approach. The aid network in post-war Europe faced the DP crisis by means of completely innovative approach that combined for the first time immediate relief actions with long-term physical, moral, social and cultural and educational rehabilitation projects with the purpose of guiding DPs towards normalization. At the end of the war, Italy was in a drastic situation from the social, political and economic points of view, and of course these difficulties affected also the refugee camps, where people suffered the lack of food and clothes, the precarious sanitary condition, and the overcrowding of the assembly centers. However, taking into account this context of instability, in the relief and rehabilitation operation, the network of institutions and organizations that work in Italy stood out as an example of successful coordination and autonomy between the UN agency and the Jewish organizations, especially the JDC. Second, Jewish DP self-determination and ambitions. The Jewish DPs refused the repatriation policy adopted by the Allies and the UN agency and strove to be recognized as a collective with the right to make Aliyah or to leave Europe. This ambition found a powerful expression in the ideological foundation in the concentration camp of the Sherit Apleta, a biblical expression used by the Jewish DPs to refer to themselves and ambivalently translated as the surviving remnant and the saved remnant. Already in November 1945, the Jewish DPs in Italy themselves founded their own organization of Jewish refugees in Italy, OGRI, with the support of the Jewish Brigade and the JDC. With the motto, "The eternity of Israel will never fail, our hopes are not lost yet," the first conference of OGRI institutionalized the Jewish DPs' presence in Italy and started an official political discourse among the Jewish DPs in the country. With the establishment of OGRI, the Jewish survivors in Italy claim an active role in determining their own future, motivating by, I'm quoting, "the urgent necessity to improve the situation of the Jewish DPs in Italy, to hasten their emigration and settlement in Palestine, and to assist them in their effort towards rehabilitation and ultimate emigration." The third factor is Zionism. Since the liberation of Feramonti in September 1943, the Jewish soldiers sponsored Zionism as a leading force, which took on a particular character of an organizational and unifying ideological paradigm. From the political point of view, if we look at the relation between the Zionists and the Jewish DPs, we can recognize that on the one hand, the effort of the Jewish agency definitely attributed to the Jewish DPs a political factor, able to influence the Zionist struggle for the establishment of the Jewish national home, and on the other hand, successfully direct the Jewish DPs to evolve a sense of belonging to Eretz Israel. The Zionists were determined to look ahead rather than to dwell on the effect of the trauma. If we look at the human aspect of this relationship, I argue that Zionism became the most important element of cohesion. For those Jewish DPs who did not wish to be resettled in Eretz Israel, it became a powerful ideology supporting their urgency to reaffirm their Jewish identity. Whereas for those who long to make Aliyah, Zionism represents a concrete opportunity to regain their purposefulness and start a new life after the war. However, once again, this analysis is incomplete if we don't look at the Jewish DPs as men and women with different backgrounds and different desires. Beyond the political strategies of the rescuers, reality was even more complicated, and the Jewish DPs as far to be seen as a monolithic entity wishing to be resettled in Palestine. We can certainly say that most of the Jewish survivors who managed to reach Italy finally ended up in Palestine or Israel. However, this one was not the only choice. The US, South American countries, Australia and Canada were among the other options. We must say also that not always political affiliation stood behind the choice to migrate to a country rather than another. In any case, practical reason prevailed, such as the possibility to get an immigration visa. the chance to get reunited with other relatives, or the idea to be welcome in a warm environment. Home and family can be identified as shared priorities among all the category of DPs: youth, children, religious, Zionists and non-Zionists, etc. Motivated by the strong desire to reach this goal with the support of the humanitarian organization and under the guidelines of the Jewish soldiers and the delegates of the Jewish agency, they made their experience of displacement a springboard for their rebirth. The result was a vivid cultural and political atmosphere where Zionism was a permeating and often dominant forces, but where the Jewish DPs were also able to shape their new identity. Now I want to conclude by show you some pictures which can give you an idea, most of you already know, of the Jewish DPs' lives inside the DP camps. Many of these pictures are group pictures, so you have, for example, children and adults. These pictures show you that education was a priority both for the humanitarian organization and for the Zionists. For the Zionists, education means Zionist education, so children receive mainly studying in school where teachers came from Eretz Israel to teach Hebrew. Adults were given the possibility to attend professional courses. Many pictures, most of them are from the DP camps in Puglia. Work was also very important because both for the refugees themselves, who were anxious to have an active role in their life after the war, but also for the refugee agency who benefit from this employee in order to reduce the workload of their staff. Many recreational activity were undertaken by the Jewish DPs, and arts was a means by which the Jewish DPs were able to express themselves. You can see music, but also theater. Most of them enjoy also the sea. They bring us the bikini fashion. Sports was also important in the DP camps as a means to become reoriented to normal life. Politics always play an important role. Protest. The Jewish DPs often organize demonstration against the white paper and the British policy in Mandate Palestine. Jewish celebration also play an important role to reaffirm the Jewish DPs' Jewish identity. And as I told you, family was the priority for them, so most of them got married in the DP camps. We know that, for example, in the refugee camps of Santa Maria al Bagno between 1943 and 1947, around 400 weddings were celebrated. So we have a lot of pictures of weddings and a lot of pictures of children. Because in the DP camps it happens a baby boom. So with this picture I conclude my my lecture. Oh, this is my email in case you want to contact me, and I conclude and I'm ready for your feedback and questions.
Thank you so much, Chiara.
Thank you.
I'll just take around the microphone for our questions. So first, here's Jack.
Chiara, thanks very much.
Thank you.
For a wonderful talk. Chiara, your mother lives in Nardo. What were you born there?
No, I was born in Switzerland, but I grew up in Nardò, so...
So you grew up there, and,
Yeah.
and your grandparents grew
Yeah.
up there? So they would have seen a lot of the Jewish DPs over there. Is that where you learnt something about this, or...?
I learned about the DPs in my hometown when I went to Venice to study Hebrew, when my professor showed a slide and say, she was talking about Aliyah Bet and the policy of the British government in Palestine, and she showed this picture of a coffee in my hometown with something written in Hebrew. So there I discovered that in my hometown during 1944, 1947, there were more than 2,500 Jewish DPs. I didn't know about the Jewish DPs before, so this is weird.
A lot of Jewish DPs from that area actually married in Nardo.
Yeah.
How many?
There were around 400 weddings in the Santa Maria al Bagno DP camp. Santa Maria al Bagno is a village close to Nardò, which is my hometown, and it's part of Nardò municipality.
Tell me, sorry, just one other thing.
Yeah.
How many DPs, Jewish DPs, actually came to Australia? And what percentage went to Israel? And that's it.
I don't know about numbers and statistics. I can say that most of the Jewish DPs who ended up in Italy, finally they went to Palestine, Israel. But I don't know how many, because most of them went illegally to Palestine. And I have no idea about how many went to Australia. Maybe I will... Australia, sorry.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'll stand up. I've been asked. I'm asking the question on behalf of my wife, whose family lived in a refugee camp in Bari, and who were married. Her parents were married in Barletta, and along the way they lost somebody, a young child, in Modena, and then before they came to Australia they were in somewhere near Rome called San Damaso. Now, excuse me, these are all recorded in the book that my late mother-in-law wrote. Where can we find information? Because a couple of years ago we went to Italy and I searched everywhere and I found very little or almost nothing about the Jewish refugee camps in Bari or Barletta or any of these other places. Is there a store of information that we can access?
I answer? Okay. In Italy, it's difficult to find an archive or something where you can specifically find this kind of material. There is a museum in Santa Maria al Bagno which tells the story of the DPs in Santa Maria al Bagno, but this museum is without archives, so you can't find documents. Usually you can check the municipality archives, which are it's hard to get access to this kind of archives. But I think that you can find also something just in the digital collection of the USHMM or the Joint also digitalize a lot of documents, paper and photos. Yeah, in Italy you need to be precise and you need to go to the precise archive of the municipality you are looking for.
Thank you. Who's next?
Thank you very much for it.
Thank you.
Was there much anti-Semitism after the war in Italy?
Do you mean between locals and the Jewish DPs? from the sources I analyze, which are mostly institutional sources from the rescue network, I didn't find evidence of anti-Semitism. It seems from testimonies of the DPs, it seems that relation between Jewish DPs and locals were, generally speaking, good. But there are only some examples that I cannot identify as anti-Semitic episode. For example, in this Santa Maria al Bagno DP camp, where the Jewish DPs were accommodated in private houses and villas. At some point, the owners of this house protest against the municipality to have back their homes. But they never protest against the Jewish DPs. They just want their home back, even because the Jewish DPs, in order, for example, to get warm, they burn doors or damaged this house. So only this kind of episodes. But maybe if we want to look at this if there were anti-Semitic episodes between locals and Jewish DPs, one must look at the police or archives, which I didn't look.
Thank you very much. So my family from the Spanish Inquisition ended up in Italy. Mm-hmm. My mother's side took the name of the place where they stayed at Villa Pontremoli. And I'm a Bellolino. What I wanted to say is that my father served in Italy during the Second World War with the Allies. When Italy invaded Greece, the government of Greece, the king with the army and the government retreated to Egypt. Mm-hmm. And anybody who was military age with a Greek background, they helped. The reason for the Greek background is for Corfu. Corfu was Italian, changed hands. His younger brother, when he came of age, the British grabbed him as well. But they successfully pushed the Italians out of Greece. He was in Italy, he lost his leg in Italy. But I wasn't allowed to ask him questions. Horrible things happened during the war. And I remember as a young child asking my father, when you were in the army, what did you do? Look, he didn't want to discuss, but he just told me he was a sergeant in the army. Okay, that was it. I wouldn't ask any more questions. 20 years after he passed away, I had to have clearance from the Australian military myself, and my mother loaned me some documents. I felt he was actually a high-ranking officer, but I can't find out any more information about him. I'd like to know more about him. He's passed away a long time ago, 49 years ago.
Do you mean about what specific?
My father, and also families that were in Italy. And one of my mother's brothers went back to Italy after the war. He served there also, but from Italy he went to Israel, so became an officer in the Israeli army. My father's brother also went to Italy, but in the end from Italy ended up going to Brazil.
Yeah.
So family history, it's hard. Now, especially when you've got a changeover between Italy and Greece, and it's very hard to find this information. And we got kicked out of Egypt also. There's nothing in Egypt.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chiara, I guess you're getting a lot of questions about how to find information from original sources and how easy it is to access. And my question on top of that would be, how easy is it if you do not speak Italian to access local Italian sources? So I think this gentleman was interested in military records. I believe there's someone here, and I'll get back to you. And, and if you're able to assist, that would be great.
Can I say something about sources? Now the ITS, which is the International Tracing Service, digitalized the collection about the about the refugees in Italy. So if you want now, you can try to type the name of the refugee you are looking for, and sometimes you can find personal items on the refugee. So this is another opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, there was someone here who wanted to
ask something. Hi. My parents were probably one of those 400 couples that got married in Nardo. But my parents never talked about their experiences in Italy, and I'm just wondering if you could give us a bit more insight about what life was like in the DP camps. I mean, they spent 2 years there. What did they do? Who fed them? Where did the money come from? That sort of, the more basic stuff.
Santa Maria al Bagno DP camp is the camp that I know more because of personal reason. Santa Maria al Bagno DP camp was located close to small towns in general. They were a little bit isolated from the towns, and only a few locals live in this DP camp, which established a really good relation with the Jewish DPs. In this museum I was talking about, there are some examples of picture that show you how the Jewish DPs live in good relationship with locals. Who feed them? The food was supplied by this network of organization, which was made by first the Allies, which authorized the UN refugee agency's missions, and then the JDC. The JDC was the first organization who contributed to give the Jewish DPs a higher standard of living condition in the refugee camps. So in the camps they basically have, the children had the chance to attend schools, and the adults had the chance to attend vocational training courses, so in order to learn a job, which was important also to become a good candidate for emigration. And also from the Zionist point of view, this was in line with the Zionist principle to go back and to manual labor. I can say that they lived a normal life, but in this context of instability, they had the chance to get closer to normal life. So I think that the most sad things for them was the need to wait again to find a home and a place to stay, to establish their family and a normal life. So while waiting for this, they were educated, they organize recreational activities, as you see, theater, music, so they were very active in the DP camp.
Hi, good evening. My wife was born in Modena. Would there be any lists and dates of arrival of those refugees in Modena? Yes.
I found only few information about Modena, which seems that it was run first by the Allies and then by UNRWA. I mainly find these sources in the Allied sources, which are in London. But Modena was a mixed camp for Jews, but also for refugees from other nationalities. But I don't have list of arrival and departures from Modena.
Thank you. I just want to point out an interesting contrast between the camps in Italy and the camps in the Allied zone, the American zone in Germany. You say there were no or very few anti-Semitic incidents in the Italian camp.
To my knowledge.
Right.
So.
It's exactly the opposite in the American zone in Italy. Not only did they have anti-Semitic incidents in the DP camps from other DPs, for example, Poles, Lithuanians and so on, who even in the DP camps were very much against the Jews. And there were often extremely unpleasant incidents of beatings and so on. Another very unfortunate thing is that the American army, which consisted, of course, mainly of young men, say from 18 to 25, mainly, the American army itself displayed a lot of anti-Semitism. The youngsters in the army grew up in the WASP climate of the United States in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and brought that WASP attitude with them, and found, in fact, that the Jewish refugees, as we know, they were desperately ill and thin and starved and dirty and so on. They found them revolting, in contrast to the Germans, who seemed to be so civilized, etc. So I just wanted to point out that interesting contrast.
Thank you.
And in the American zone, there were about 500 DP camps. And you mentioned the weddings in Italy, very much the same in the German zone. What was interesting is that the Joint had to bring out or send an enormous number of wedding rings. There were no wedding rings to be had, and they did that. Thank you. There are a few other things I could say, but I won't last.
That's a lovely anecdote about the wedding rings, though. Thank you, Frida.
I can recall we lived in Bari. We lived in Bari when my sister and I were born, and I remember my mother, who had an Auschwitz tattoo on her arm. She told the story how when she went shopping, people wouldn't take money from her, and it may have only been one or two occasions, but generally the Italians were just wonderful to them. And then also I was going to... then there was a wonderful film shown here 2 years ago of about 3 Israeli women who were born in the displaced persons camp, and we all saw it, and it was just delightful, and it gives you a really wonderful insight into how they organised themselves and how they lived, and visiting an old nun who had been a nurse in one of the hospitals, and this woman said, I'm one of the babies you delivered. I mean, it's just a delightful film. And my last question is, my father was in Ferramonte. I just wondered if there's a list. Can I access a list of who was in there?
I will give you the link because someone created a database with the names of the internees in Ferramonte, so you can check if you can find the name.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Can I precise something about anti-Semitic episodes? I don't want to contribute to create the myth of the good Italian, but just to be precise, to my knowledge, I never found evidence of anti-Semitics, and from the testimonies I had the chance to analyze, I always had this impression of a good relationship between locals and Jews. So maybe there are some other sources which testify different things, but at the moment I'm not able to.
I said I just lived for 18 months as a 10, 11-year-old, but I went to school. We had a Jewish school. We had a wonderful time in Milano. I had a beautiful Italian teacher for piano. I had girlfriends, Italians, and I enjoyed our
I mean, we can distinguish between the political level and the personal level. So, Mussolini was not so...
I think this is the issue about every single person's story is so different and varied, and that's what's so important about giving testimony. Can I just check how many people need to ask questions? Okay, so we'll have 1, 2 and 3, and then we might wrap it up. But Chiara has very generously presented her email address, so if you would like to follow up any further details with her, you're very welcome to.
Hello, thank you very much for that talk. I just have a question regarding the camps, DPs, how they were set from memory in Roma, in Nelle Marche and in Puglia. Specifically in Puglia, why were they there in those specific locations? Were there any kind of commonality, common variables? And you also said 65% of the DPs went on the side of Bari and Lecce. Were any in Taranto as well, or?
In Taranto there were only military camps, so for prisoners of war, and also Taranto was a transit site for Yugoslavs, which were divided between monarchists and partisans. So it was a place where the Allies sought the Yugoslavs refugees. I tried to find the reason why the Allies set up this DP camp in those specific location, but I wasn't able to find a reason. But I think that for Bari and for Lecce province, for Bari, they reopened former prisoners of war camps, so it was, I think, a practical reason. And also in Lecce province, they use this village where people live only in summer. They identify these villages where people live only in summer and requisition this building which was used only during a season. I don't know if there are other reasons for this.
I'm a child survivor of the Holocaust. We spent 3 years in Italy. My first education was in Italian, Italian school, in Adriatica. You mentioned Bari. There was a camp at Trani, where I lived for a while, and it was run basically by the Joint and the Brecha. I have some photographs here which I would like to give to you.
Of course, thank you.
Of myself as a young person, and the Israeli flag, the original blue and white, which is not the one that we have now. The Brecha used it at the time. I have one here, which I would like to share with you. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very comprehensive
Thank you.
comments.
I just want to point out, Chiara, this is Charles German, and he was featured in our Facebook post, and I was showing Chiara some of the items that we have in our archive, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and I believe we've got one more person.
I'd like to know your opinion. I was a refugee in Italy in 1939 till 1946, and I'm a survivor. And I thank the Italian government and the Italian people for my survival and my parents' survival. And I came to Australia in 1946. And as I'm getting older and getting towards the end of my life, I ask myself, Italy had racial laws Mussolini introduced in 1938. How come that they are the only nation who let us in from Germany and from Austria? Can you give me your opinion on that? Could be anche in italiano, non deve essere in inglese.
No, va bene. It's not my opinion, but it's the opinion of historiography, that Mussolini didn't... it was not an open policy towards the Jewish refugees from Nazi-occupied territories. Mussolini avoided to persecute the Jews until 1938 for strategic reason. And for strategic reason, he let refugees in general, not only Jews, come in Italy, to enter Italy. On the one hand, he wanted to... Refugees became a means by which regulating the relationship between states during the war. So on the one hand, Mussolini wants to consolidate his ties with Germany, but at the same time, he wants to gain a position in the international political scenario. So he wants to feed the relationship with France and the UK. So he continued the liberal tradition of Italy to welcome refugees, but it wasn't an open policy toward the Jewish refugees. Mussolini even didn't participate to the Evian conference. So just to give you an idea, it was Only some historical circumstances gave the chance to the to the non-Italian Jews who were interned in Italy to be free before Mussolini started persecution. So this is not my opinion, but it's the historiography. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce Pauline Rockman, our co-president.
So on behalf of the Jewish Holocaust Centre, I wish to thank you, Chiara, for your most informative presentation this evening, particularly highlighting the experience of the Jewish DPs and their descendants in Italy. You have spoken about the Shoah and the aftermath, the DP camps, and the Hachsharot, and the role of resettling afterwards, and the Zionists as well. And as you may have seen, a big proportion here this evening are descendants and survivors and their descendants who fortunately made their way to Australia after the Shoah. And it's really interesting that you're highlighting what has been a previously little-known part of the whole scheme of the aftermath of the Shoah. And it's very important that this work is continued. And we see that the whole Europe, how much it's been affected and what it was done, and the role of Italy, which is, not so clean and not so sure. So it's wonderful. So keep up the great work. And on behalf of us at the Centre, I'd like to present you with this, which is a history of our Holocaust Centre here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this warm welcome. Thank you very much.